Hi, everybody. I'm Cody McElrea. I'm the founder and CEO of Tru North Naturals. I've got Brandon Wally, a good friend of mine, Brandon Wally, and colleague, who's also our chief operating officer at Tru North. We wanted to give a brief overview of Tru North, what we've done in the previous 10 years since inception, where the current market is, and where we see it going, and how Tru North fits into all that. So I founded the company on a love for the forest and, basically walking through the forest, identifying these species. I've always had a love for foraging since I was a young kid and a love for natural medicine. And, I lived on Vancouver Island for a while, lived in the bush there for about 6 months. And that's essentially where I started first selling my mushrooms. I started foraging chanterelles out there, living off the land as much as I could, harvesting mussels at low tide, setting crab traps, and then I've always had a love for being self-sufficient in the bush. And I moved back to Ontario after I was spent some time, about 6 months out in Vancouver Island, and I built a little off-grid cabin where I lived for the last 10 years up until a year ago. And when I moved back home, I started looking around Ontario forests for different species of fungi that we could harvest. That's when I found chaga. And, over the years, the business has grown. We built really great relationships with sustainable forest license holders, Anishinaabe. My wife is Anishinaabe, my son's Anishinaabe, so we take great pride in working with First Nations communities, working with sustainable forest license holders to make sure that we're doing everything ethically and sustainably, because we keep forest conservation and sustainable forest management at the forefront of everything we do. That being said, we notice that you're able to scale this particular species and seven other particular species if you're doing it ethically. And we've built a data collection software that we started collecting data about 8 years ago and overlaying it with existing data and proving the economic viability of these products. And we actually just launched an app that shows harvesters where to go, species composition of the forest, no-go zones like glyphosate sprayed zones. So it creates huge efficiencies for our harvesters, but it also creates pure products from the forest because we can monitor exactly where they were, who did it. We have before and after photos on this software. So it ties really well into our values and our ethos as a company, because we have full traceability into the collection sites and how to manage the forest properly. So, about 3 years ago, I met my good friend Brandon, who found me and was looking for a species of fungi called Phelinus. And yeah, Brandon, I don't know if you want to take it from here, but
Sure. Yeah. So my background, I was lucky enough to be born actually on Vancouver Island and grew up very close to nature here, hunting and fishing in the mountains, foraging mushrooms, chanterelles, our local version of the Matsutake pine mushrooms, the whole thing. So, that's my origin story, but from there, I went and became a biochemist trained at the University of Victoria. And I worked in a number of laboratories, ended up working for a pharmaceutical company that was cross purposes, focused on fungi, on looking at wild fungi in the temperate rainforest of Vancouver Island for novel scaffolds for new drugs. So I did that for a number of years, and was really passionate about it, really passionate about the chemistry, really passionate about the forest, really passionate about the mushrooms. And from there, I moved on to work more with natural products. I was on a project looking for a specific molecule that's common in the genus Phelinus. And I was looking for if we could source this at scale. And Phelinus igniarius species group, which is known as the willow bracket commonly. And I came across Cody's company. He's the only one doing it at scale. And we hit it off, and he presented some of the problems with the industry, which I already knew to some degree, but there was, there's a really the mushroom natural product space. The biggest problem is most of the products are coming from untraceable channels coming out of Asia. They're processed and most of the biggest sales are around like water soluble powders or like these different powdered extracts. The interesting thing, like, I mean, and some of these are quality extracts, but there's just a lack of trust with some of these suppliers. Obviously, Asia is where mushroom culture is grown for centuries and centuries, and there's some of the best products in the world come out of there, but also some very shady practices too. So yeah, not to besmirch that product, but you really need some oversight into what those products actually are, versus the Canadian potential for a lot of these wild harvested products like chaga is absolutely immense. There's 360 billion trees in the Canadian boreal forest, more trees than there are stars in the Milky Way, and a good percentage of these are birch, potentially chaga bearing trees, right? So if this is done in a sustainable way, the scale of it's immense, and it really isn't being done. And the reason for that is because processing out of Asia is just so much cheaper. So I knew about a piece of technology that could dramatically reduce our processing costs and create a novel product that has a lot of the properties that end users want: water solubility, the ability to be incorporated into food products, while maintaining that, well, from like the raw harvested product. And the interesting thing about this too is it's a cold process, so it maintains the integrity of the actual initial product, right? Chaga is a very complex structure. It's partially tree and it's partially fungus, and it's these things meshed together. And a lot of the benefit of chaga comes from all these prebiotic fibers, right? That are fermentable fibers for your gut. So there's, hemicellulose, cellulose, lignins from the tree. Then from the fungi, there's chitin, there's fungal melanins, there's the beta glucans, which are famous, and all these things together are important for the full spectrum of effects of this fungus. And traditional use is around boiling it, but now all these companies are selling these water soluble extracts, and you lose a lot of that integrity. You also lose a lot of volatiles, because they have a lot of heating around the boiling and the spray drying, which this process that we're championing, the micronized product, the true chaga product, is, it still maintains all that. And then you have a real big dosage problem in the marketplace too. So a lot of times the consumer is buying things like lion's mane because they have a perceived physiological effect they want. They want neurological outcomes, right? They want brain health, but the thing is, they're looking at this clinical data, maybe relatively low powered clinical data, but clinical data, looking at the dosage, and then they're drinking their coffee beverage that has, a tiny fraction of the bioactive component that was actually in that clinical. They're maybe consuming 2 grams a day of mushroom with a standardized amount of the hericenones or ricins in it in the clinical, and then the actual product that people are buying contains maybe none if it's hericenones, because it's a spray dried product, or very small amounts. So there's multiple arms to this, but really what we think the future is, it'll be around standardized products with the bioactives linked to the clinical effects, and then full spectrum products that are giving you the full spectrum of the natural product, not highly processed, not removing components just to make it more soluble. And that's kind of where we're going. And over the next 1 year period, we're going to bring more and more of these products online as our true line. And then also at the same time, we're going to bring properly dosed, like nutraceutical grade products with standardized amounts of these bioactives in them to the marketplace. And that's where we see, Tru North and Truthera going over the coming months and years.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Brandon, like I think what's interesting about what we built and where we're going with it is the vertical integration piece, like the traceability systems that we have through the forest, knowing the harvesters who are doing it, monitoring, food safety practices. We're organically certified over 15 million acres and for 8 years. And this year we got Fair Wild certification. And we're actually expanding that out to over 15 million acres, hopefully next year. But the vertical integration, getting to know every portion of the process from start to finish, moving it,
Full oversight.
yeah, moving
Yeah.
it out to the lab that we have out in Prince Edward Island because we're partnered with Agriculture Canada, the National Research Council, and we have a postdoc, Dr. Gauthier, who's in the lab out there doing all sorts of different scientific analysis that Brandon, you know more about than I do. But so we have full oversight into the whole process from start to finish. We're creating these value-added products, and what's very interesting in this is this new process that we've created, or this new process that we're implementing with our fungi products are price competitive with imports coming out of Asia, and works in similar applications: food and beverage, pet health, cosmetics, nutraceuticals, and supplements. Because you can take this product and put it into like a mushroom coffee or a beverage, and it just mixes really well with those types of applications. So I've been trying to do this for 6 years in Ontario and Alberta. We worked with different universities doing 5-step processes, and they always came out way too expensive. The products themselves came out good, but the cost, it just never worked. And then I met Brandon, and he told me about this new technology, and so we've solved the price issue, and we've got, in my opinion, better products than what's coming out of China because we can validate them through our R&D arm out in PEI. So
Yeah, and I mean, you've already touched on it, but really for chaga, most of the chaga supply in the world is wild harvested, but it's untraceably wild harvested. Nobody knows anything about the sustainability. Nobody knows exactly, how close it's being harvested to industry, how close it's being harvested to spraying. I mean, it's an open secret in North America. Pretty much any any cut block it faces the risk of being sprayed with glyphosate, right, to kill off the deciduous trees. But we track all this, and we see, we monitor where our harvesters go. We have off limit areas. We actually have heat maps of where they're most likely to get the most out of their harvest time, and this all feeds into our system where you can actually follow a lot all the way back to the forest, all the way to the consumer, and nobody's doing that. And it's a huge potential. And for a wild harvested product, it gives the traceability, the security, and the regenerative nature of it all sort of in one place. And I nobody's doing this at scale like this. There's some people cultivating chaga, and I think that's really interesting. And there's some people doing it either outdoors or indoors, but the real product, the product that people have been using for millennia, is a wild harvested, pseudo canker off of a birch tree, essentially, right? And that's what we're offering. We're offering that, pure in a format that works for most of our customers, which is amazing.
yeah, and I say this quite often lately, but I find the data that the harvesters are collecting in the field to me is just as important as the medicine, because through this data collection and these initiatives and relationships that we've developed over the course of the last 10 years, we're able to prove value, economic value, but cultural value, social value, ecological value, all through this data, all these data sets and these additions that we're adding into these data sets from our internal harvesters. And just a perfect example is we worked with one particular SFL. They manage 1 million acres, 2 million acres, but 1 million acres of Great Lakes St. Lawrence Forest region, and in that is 1 million acres of chaga-bearing yellow birch trees. A lot of people aren't aware of this, but basically how the yellow birch prescription is written in the forest management plans across all of Ontario and into Atlantic Canada. I'm not sure about Quebec, but they target the logging industry will come in and classify a yellow birch that has chaga on it or another white rot fungus like artist conch, phalinus. These are diseased trees, and they take them out because they'll sporulate and create more fungi and then devalue their forests. Basically, is how they look at it. But working with a company called Clerg Forest Management in the Algoma Forest Management Unit, we were able to rewrite the yellow birch prescription and keep 1 million acres of chaga-bearing yellow birch trees standing up. I think they're taking about 50% of them now rather than 100%. So it's a huge number. And last year was the first year they implemented this, and that we're in discussions with other sustainable forest license holders. I believe there's about 39 of them in Ontario. So we're trying to work with them to keep these valuable trees standing, and I'm pretty proud of that. And it's just the way
Yeah,
that we
yeah, and there and like you say, there's cultural value and there's also ecologic value to having these trees there because so many species, require these trees that are dying of fungi to go through their life cycle, right? From amphibians and insects and other fungus species, all sorts of things, right? So it preserves forest integrity and it also provides valuable data and it shows a clear chain of custody right from the forest right to the customer, right? So you know that your product's not being harvested from an area that was sprayed in that in the last year, or right next to industry, or which it very likely is coming from if you're sourcing it untraceably, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we love talking about this stuff. So if anybody hears anything of interest, we're a couple mushroom nerds that love talking and
Yeah.
sharing about our all our stuff. So if
I talk about mushrooms all day, every day. So
yeah,
yeah, the more the better.
yes, we'd love to hear it from anybody who's interested in learning more about us. We love collaborating with other entrepreneurs and other businesses. We're a business to business model, a bulk ingredient supplier of all sorts of different fungi species. So if you want to hit us up, feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you. So